All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. What are we calling it? Psychiatry Unboxed? That's what it's called nowadays. Yeah. Okay. I had to come up with a name
We're
that
gonna have
was
the
just,
same problem.
yeah,
Psychiatry box. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah, it kind of works, right? So, goes with the whole stinker motif. So, all right. So I have Dr. Drew
Next time it's gonna
Ramsey.
be like kick shrink. This is kick
Yeah, the
shrink.
kick shrink, and we're
Kick shrink
unboxing stuff.
podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, we're unboxing the mind. Who knows what we're doing? Unboxing a pair of sneakers or something like that. So, all right. So I have Dr. Drew Ramsey, somebody I'm very, very excited to be talking to. We just had a nice little 20, 30-minute kind of session even before recording right now, which is great. So I think we were in for a fun episode. So, Dr. Ramsey, welcome to the show.
Suman, thank you so much, man. It's really a treat to be with you. I'm a big fan of yours, and you really represent something to me of what's happening and mental health getting out there and the diversity and creativity of our field. So it's a real treat. Everybody listening,
Yeah.
great to be with you. I look forward to this combo.
Yeah, it should be fun ones. So thank you, thank you. So, all right. I always kind of start off with give us a little your bio, your background, your blah blah blah, a little bit about yourself. You get to
Blah, blah, blah,
splurge.
blah. So I do a number of different things. Mostly I'm a psychiatrist. I think that's how I want you all to think of me. I see patients. I care about seeing patients. I've really dedicated myself to being a clinician first and understanding everything, the evidence, the science, the wellness movement, kale, kombucha, all in the context of sitting with patients. That's the most
Yeah,
important part of my professional life. I've been really interested in food nutrition. I grew up on a farm in southern Indiana and then kind of made my way eventually to med school at IU, Indiana University, and then to Columbia Psychiatry, where I trained in adult psychiatry and stayed on as a faculty member there for about 20 years. And my interest really twofold. One, I got really curious about media and like how we weren't doing a great job
yeah,
engaging the public, that I'd meet people and, they'd hear I'm a psychiatrist and they think all I want to do is give them Prozac or it was it just felt like there was a lot mental health had to offer. And as social media was coming online, I was one of the early psychiatrists getting involved. I helped, actually, one of my, I guess, claims to fame, I helped the APA get their Instagram started. I
nice.
encouraged Columbia Psychiatry to get on Instagram, just with this notion of like, we've got to show people what mental health is. And if we can't make a meme or a graphic or a picture describing helpful information, if we can't help people visualize mental health, we're not helping win the war. And so uh, in terms of the mental health epidemic, and there are lots of
Yes.
wars going on. And so I've written a few books. My first was The Happiness Diet in 2011. That was my first book. It was a really amazing experience, complicated project with Rodale Books. And Tyler Graham is a co-author who's a magazine writer. And so just learned a lot about like content and how you frame ideas. Because as doctors and physicians, right, I think like what's cool is like omega-3 fats and the latest meta-analysis. And like that's not as
All
cool.
right.
What's cool to people is like what fish should I be eating?
Yep.
Right? Do I need to be worried about mercury? Like how do I make this taste delicious? How do I help
Yep.
my kids eat this? And so understanding that perspective of the public and the reader and audience, that led to 50 Shades of Kale, which was a really fun book to do, really came
Yep.
together very fast. One of those, I think, examples where something that phrase was actually stuck in my head. We were living, my wife and I were living downtown in the West Village in this little tiny apartment. And I'm from a farm. I've been away from a farm for a long time. And we're living down
Yeah.
there. There's this little farmer's market in Abington Square, so down on 12th Street in the West
Yep.
Village. And I had so much fun waking up on Saturdays and throwing a pair of shorts and walking out to this farmer's market and talking to all these farmers and loading up on produce and all this kale started showing up. All these different varieties
Yep.
of kale. That's when 50 Shades of Grey exploded. And I just couldn't
Yep.
get this idea out of my head. So 50 Shades of Kale came out. I wanted to do something a little more productive. So we launched National Kale Day, which was my first attempt to make a national holiday out of a vegetable after having a sex book about that vegetable. That probably wasn't the best for my academic medical career, Kale Ronica, the genre.
Oh
But
yes. Oh yeah.
after that came Eat Complete, my first nutritional psychiatry cookbook.
Okay.
And the book
Nice.
was really designed with the idea that there are a set of nutrients that we know are more important for mental health.
Hmm.
And we know omega-3 fats and iodine and selenium. They've got some signal in the data, but none of us know where to find those foods. I'm sorry,
Right.
where they're finding those nutrients. And so this
Yeah.
book really took those 21 nutrients that most of us felt were most important, things like magnesium and zinc, and just, where do you find these in food? And then the recipes are made out of the top five foods. And so every recipe here is like the top five foods for zinc or for magnesium.
Nice.
So you're getting like 40 to 50 to 100% of some of these key nutrients in every recipe. And then after Eat Complete came Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, which is my most recent book. Really fun book. Got to work with a great illustrator and a great team to make some wonderful recipes, but also really
Awesome.
introduce the public to this idea of nutritional psychiatry a little bit more than the cookbook. The cookbook definitely goes through a lot of these ideas, but they over the years between the books, we taught the first nutritional psychiatry clinician training at the Omega
Yeah.
Institute in 2018 and began to really think through some of how do you help patients and people conceptualize eating for their mental health.
Yeah.
And so a lot of illustrations about food categories, about the actual nutrients and what they do in your mind and in your brain, and then some really just simple, delicious recipes. So those are the books. But it's like that's a book heavy introduction.
Well,
I've,
that's totally fine.
I've been, I think the other things about me is I've been really blessed to get to be in a lot of different places. So I've been practicing in Manhattan for most of my
Hmm.
career. Then for 4 years, I was living in rural Indiana, where I'm from, with my
Yeah.
parents, and my wife and kids on a farm, and
Nice.
commuting back and forth, where I got to have a foot. It's just fascinating to me to have a foot in kind of New York City psychiatry life, and then to have a foot back in rural Indiana, where the opioid crisis was raging, and where there weren't
Oh
any
yeah.
mental health services. And then a couple of years ago, we moved our family out to Jackson, Wyoming. And so out here on my cowboy psychiatry spiritual mountain quest phase, but have launched a new clinic out here, a multidisciplinary mental health clinic called Spruce Mental Health. And in
Okay.
Spruce Mental Health, we are trying to really do responsible integrative mental health, but also wanted to understand how psychedelic medicine fits into responsible clinical care. And just as a clinician, it felt like I was reading all the studies and reading all the hype and did some trainings, and they just wanted to have a clinic where I can just see in real time what it looks like. You can read
Yeah.
all about ketamine assisted psychotherapy, but now that I've led a number of journeys and a number of groups and had a number of trainings, I have a much better sense about how that fits into a clinical care model than I did when I was on the outside of it.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
don't know if you
that's
know someone. I think that I've got a couple kids. I got a wife that I adore, and I really, I guess I'm trying to think of other aspects. Oh, I work with Bring Change to Mind, which is a great
okay.
non-stigma, and I think you're in child. So one of the things I love about Bring Change to Mind is we have over 15,000 kids around the country in
Oh wow.
mental health clubs in high
Yeah.
schools. There are clubs in 36 states. So if your high school doesn't have a club, check out Bring Change to Mind. It's Glenn Close's nonprofit, and the
Okay.
goal of the
Nice.
nonprofit is to fight stigma. But
Yeah.
the idea that one of the reasons we don't talk about mental health is we're scared to because of stigma, and so that's another place that I spend a little bit of time. Yeah.
So keep him very very busy with
Oh,
everything.
Men's Health. Greg Scott Brown. If you
Oh.
care about male mental health, Greg Scott Brown and I have the series on Men's Health Magazine on their Instagram called Friday Sessions. We have over 100 episodes talking to very
Oh wow.
prominent men and women about male mental
Yeah.
health. So, like the U.S. Surgeon General, Greg interviewed him, or Kevin Love.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. Yep.
it's just a really wonderful series. So those are some of the things I guess everybody I'm involved with are trying to just, like Sloman, get this conversation going,
Yeah.
keep it fresh, keep it honest, keep it engaging, and also just be honest. We got to do better. Like mental health doesn't get better by watching and saying it's bad and being aware. Mental health gets better by us taking action. So,
Yeah. No, I think you're one of the first, like you're kind of saying, like one of the first kind of influencers in this field. I know we hate the word influencer to an extent, but like the, I think training wise, going back, like we were all taught to kind of be like very hush hush and quiet and behind, closed doors, and it's the old boys club kind of thing. And I think, like I said, you're one of the first to kind of really start to be like challenge that narrative of saying, no, if we want to change the perception of what the field is, then we have to be out there and doing all these things. And, like you're saying, like carry that, hopefully that message a little bit to saying that we have to be out there so that people recognize us and not just dismiss us.
Yeah, and I think it also forces us to craft our message in a way that we haven't been. Psychotherapy and
Yeah.
psychiatry generally are somewhat passive, and there
Hmm.
isn't a lot of scrutiny in a certain way other than by your patient. And so
Yeah.
putting your ideas out there into the public, right? Having comments open and having people, respond positively and negatively, I think it's really, really important in how you get your message across and how
Oh
you learn
yeah.
to focus. I was think creativity wise, just being pushed to make content, make images, put words down that help people feel motivated around their mental health. That's
Yeah.
where, I love the nutritional psychiatry piece, this idea that we can all use food because it's equalizing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, Suleiman eats just like I do, just like you do, whoever is listening, wherever you are, right?
Yeah.
If you've got a family like we do, in the back of your head, you're like, what's for dinner? Like, ooh, what's stocked in the fridge, right? It's kind of, we're all thinking about it. And so I love that because remind me a little bit. Remember early in the pandemic when, like, if you're a clinician, like you and your patients were in the same trauma,
Oh
which
yeah.
was a really unique thing.
Yep.
And I loved it, right? Because there's a way that you're really connected about a similar, it wasn't this question like, do you get how scared I am? And I'm spraying down on my boxes with alcohol. It's like, oh, I get it. Don't worry.
We're all there. Yeah.
And so there's something about food that feels like that. We all
Yeah.
eat, right? We all
Yep.
struggle with wanting carbs and ice cream sometimes. We all, wish it were fresher or more homemade or organic. And so I really love how the kind of notion of helping people evolve as an eater to
Yep.
include more of this new science around how food impacts mental health.
Yeah. So I was like, before we jump into all of that, I was like, start off. I know we're like 10 minutes into it, but like a surprise question. So the surprise question, then we'll jump into the like nutritional nitty gritties. But the surprise question is this: since we're talking about like food, nutritional psychiatry and stuff, we'll ask the famous question: what is your last meal? You're on death row in your last meal. What's going to be your last meal?
I'd say like right now I've been really feeling like pesto and salmon. So I think I'd probably have a
Okay.
wild salmon with a side of pesto gnocchi. I'd have a
Yeah.
couple different kombuchas. I'd have a hopped kombucha from Happy Leaf. They've got a great Citra hopped grapefruit kombucha, and I'd also have probably it's a toss up. There's a couple, but I've had a couple kombucha flavors. Probably
Okay.
there's another grapefruit one. I'm big into the grapefruit buchas. I'd have a side of sauteed kale and garlic, cut thin, chiffonade, garlic not overcooked but a little crispy.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna finish that off. Ooh, dessert wise, it's gonna be a little tough because that's gonna be the last thing I eat before I pass. And it's gonna be hard not to go with like a classic lifelong favorite, like scoop of mint chocolate chip, scoop of coffee ice cream. But if we're
Yeah.
gonna keep it like brain food centric, I'm probably gonna go with that's hard. This is my last meal. This is hard. I'm seeing pistachios and I'm seeing a lot of berries and I'm seeing
Okay.
a kind of like I'm seeing some sort of like kind of mousse, like but more not chocolate, more of like a vanilla lemon, kind of lemon curd, kind of.
Yeah.
Let me just see. I feel like there's something missing. But that mosaic's me seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little
Yeah.
dark chocolate. There's no dark chocolate. Then I have a little
Ah,
square
you need a
dark
little
chocolate.
chocolate. Yeah.
I'd probably do some mindful meditation, dark chocolate squares with the people who are going to put me down, just because it's that feels like feels appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's like, not something that they enjoy either. So you got to have like some closure with them as well, right?
Well, I don't
Or
know. I've
some
not been
moment with them.
executed before, but I would say there's probably already revealing something about my character of like I'd want it to be inclusive as much as we could. I don't know,
Yeah.
energetically positive experience. I'm not sure that's even possible. That's my last meal, Silma. I would think that one, yeah, that one
That's a
sounds.
pretty solid meal there. So, no, it's good. All right. Let's jump into the fun stuff. All right. What is nutritional psychiatry as a whole, if you're trying to break it down for people? I think you talked about it a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, let me just define it. So it hasn't had a definition. There are only a
Hmm.
handful of us. I've been interested in this really ever since I was a resident, and there started to come out some data that some countries that eat seafood have a different rate of bipolar disorder. And that's really
Hmm.
odd because generally, severe mental illnesses, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, we kind of think about them as having sort of the same rate everywhere.
Yeah.
So nutritional psychiatry is the use of food to optimize brain health. That's the first part. And I like that because it's all of us. You don't have to have a mental health condition to care about feeding your neurons. And I like this because it pulls all of us into mental health and mental fitness.
Hmm.
And then the second part is it's the use of food for the treatment and prevention of mental health concerns.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to meet diagnostic criteria, but if you're moody in the winter, and you don't ever eat seafood or fermented foods, there are a couple of more moves nutritionally that are backed up by the literature that, we want you to consider.
Yeah.
And then the prevention part, I just think is exciting. If you look at a lot of the epidemiological data, there are studies showing a 30 to 50% reduction in the risk of depression over 4.5 years of college for people who eat sort of most like a Mediterranean or traditional style dietary pattern.
Yeah.
That's really cool data. You look at the meta-analysis, it's about 18.2% risk reduction. So, you can debate the data back and forth, but I just think it's a fascinating idea. And it's really, especially for anybody who's got mental health stuff or mental health stuff in their family, where like you want to have a little more active role, not just like, oh, am I going to get depressed? Where you can be like, I'm going to eat in a way, move my body in a way.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and relate in a way, kind of have these elements of what we're calling mental fitness that do the best to try and prevent that. Or if I do have an episode of some type, minimize the impact.
Yeah. I think that's really important to us because I think, the genetics is a thing that's out of all of our control, right? We can't do much with that, but we can always control what we put in our mouth, right? And it's one of the things that when we talk about like eating disorders that shows up is we can control what we put in our mouths. So when we learn about this stuff, we put ourselves at, or there's risks of things occurring, and we can kind of hopefully minimize those risks or potentially prevent things from happening again. It is very empowering. And my sister, I joke around and say my sister's a radicalized fundamentalist vegan, right? And she loves it. It's very empowering for her. She's had a total life change by making that, and she looks back and she attributes a lot of the positive changes in her life to that decision. And I've gone on various like diets and stuff or little periods of times and stuff in my life, and I've seen there's been some effects, or I know that like, oh, my body functions better when I do this, or it functions a lot worse and crappier if I do these things. And so it's natural to kind of then extend that, right? To kind of say like, well, this probably impacts our mood and how we do and seriously mental illness stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a common sense element to it, that you are what you eat.
Yeah.
I do think there's been a disconnect. People are a little surprised when they start hearing about the concrete data around
Yeah.
things like depression. And then I think your example about your sister is a really good one. Now, a lot of times people in the nutritional psychiatry world or wellness world get up in arms about the vegan lifestyle.
Yeah.
This is, where people aren't eating any
Yeah.
meat or animal products, sometimes even no honey. And I think it illustrates a little bit what we were talking earlier, just a little bit about like what we call neutrality
Hmm.
and anonymity. And my feeling, and I'm pretty strong about this because I've definitely been in lots of debates with vegans, but it feels to me as a clinician, the really top tier of my functioning is when I think about nutrition like I think about religion. My job is not to convert you to Catholicism.
Right.
My job is to note that spirituality is really important for mental health. You used to have a lot of spirituality, now you don't. Or you've never had any spirituality. What do you think about that? What does it mean to you? Why not? Are
Yeah.
you curious? Right? And then if you develop something, anything from like meditating to going to church to nothing, right? I've in a neutral way highlighted something that's important. And I think foods like that, where some people are going to go vegan, some people are going to go carnivore, some people are going to go keto. But nutritional
Yeah.
psychiatry is above all that. So nutritional psychiatry is saying you as an eater matter and your food choices matter to your mental health. And there's new concepts in mental health that people aren't thinking about
Yeah.
in relationship to their food. Like if you think about inflammation, everybody cares about inflammation. What's the number one thing involved in inflammation in your life every day? Your food for most
Right.
people.
Right.
And so how do we, or neuroplasticity, right? Don't you want to eat the foods that help your brain like repair and grow faster? Like I
Yeah.
definitely eat that. So how can we help, sort of individuals feel motivated, not feel like oppressed or
Yeah.
fearful, like, oh no, you didn't eat that, did you? Of
Yeah.
course you have depression. Like none of
Yeah.
that. But to be above that and to say, we are clinicians here to help you manifest as the best eater you can be. And if it's like your sister, I love these stories where people are like, I did this thing and it radically transformed my life. And I am incredibly fulfilled, happy, energized, spiritually connected with my values around what I eat. I mean, that is the whether you're vegan or not, but that's the kind of goal of nutritional psychiatry for me. Content as an
Okay.
eater.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, we get very much when we talk about food and stuff, we don't want to get like into these dogmatic kind of conversations because that's where like eating disorders come from, right? Is when we start to get very dogmatic about things and say like, well, I can't do this, or this is a bad food, or this is a good food, or assigning morality to food, right?
Well, I think that it is one of the complicating factors of the wellness movement and nutritional
Yeah.
psychiatry. It's funny, part of my super ego around this comes from a couple of clinicians at Columbia who are like eating disorder leaders, Joanna Steinglass and Evelyn Attia and Deb Glassifer.
Uh-huh.
And I think because knowing that I was talking about food, but not as an approach to treat eating disorders, but using some maybe values or some ideas that, if not handled or treated correctly or used correctly, could help someone create or justify an eating disorder, or this softer eating disorder called orthorexia.
Orthorexia.
It's
Yeah.
not that
Yeah.
I have an eating disorder, it's just I can't eat any of that poisonous food that you prepared because it's not
Right.
organic, so I've brought my own. Right,
Correct.
where
Yeah.
my food rules don't, as you said with your sister, empower and lead to health, but instead disempower and lead to constriction and disease. And so I think being really cautious of, labeling foods as good and bad is kind of concerning. I tend to label foods as things like nutrient dense, right? With
Hmm.
the idea that, a lot of folks with eating disorders are focused on calories. Calories are a really awful metric.
Yeah.
They don't tell us a can of Coke and a kale salad have the same number of calories. They don't tell us anything about food other than how much energy it has. What really matters is nutrient density.
Hmm.
So when I'm eating a lentil for 230 calories in a cup, I'm getting 90% of my folate. I'm getting 70% of my fiber. I'm getting a ton of magnesium, right? I'm getting 18 grams of protein. Right? I'm getting nutrient density, and there's a set of foods
Yeah.
out there that they've got more brain nutrition than the other foods. So, do I want to call those the good foods? No, like there's still coffee ice cream at my final meal. But I do want to encourage people to have a stronger and more connected relationships with those foods.
Hmm. How does all of this fit in with this traditional idea of like Western quote unquote psychiatry of like the pills and the medicines and blah 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 that's there?
I think it fits in really well because it's been missing, and
Yeah.
I know I'm biased, but it's just, how do you feel? How does anybody listening feel? You go in, you hear, share with somebody, all the stuff we ask, your mood, anxiety, cognitive problems, addiction, character stuff, relationship stuff, development stuff, past psychiatric history, like all the history. When you then, feather in a little bit to ask about, hey, I want to hear about your lifestyle and some of the things that we know relate to your mental health. Can we start with telling me a little bit about how you think about food and nutrition?
Hmm.
It was interesting, but when I first had to ask those questions, I was a little scared, Salman. Like, I
Yeah.
came out of a very traditional program. I'm very much like, Western, like classic psychodynamic model in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, doing kind of meds and therapy combined with most patients.
Yep.
And so the idea that I'm going to be asking and talking about, wild salmon and especially early on before we had the framework we have now, where it's a little more clear to me how to talk to
Yeah.
patients about food. I was surprised how well it fit in. One, it was a truly light and neutral topic that everybody eats, everybody struggles with stuff about eat, everybody's kind of thinking about it. And so it felt like it aligned me with my patients. The second part I noticed is I learned things about their history that I never would have gotten.
Yeah.
Like if you ask your patients what the dinner table was like for them when they were kids, like you're a
Yep.
child
Oh yeah.
psychiatrist, maybe you
Yep.
know about that, but I never really asked about like food security
Yep.
and how it was. And you start hearing these stories. Oh, my mom would feed my brother, but she'd never serve me. I always had to serve myself. I think about that every time I eat. Whoa,
Yep.
never
Yeah.
would have heard about that. Or, I don't eat nuts. Why not? Well, I was 4. My mom forced me to eat these nuts that were rancid, and I haven't had any ever since. Where there's just kind of so there are these wonderful like food stories that really feel they
Yeah.
relate to mental health. Where, again, in that Western model, the only time you ask about food is around eating disorders. Have you had
Right.
problems with food? Do you have challenges? Have you restricted? Do you overexercise? Have you purged? And so I really love the idea of it feels to me like going back to actually the origins of mental health and psychiatry, which is to really know our patients
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and to hear in detail about their lives. And so I think it fits in well. I think it's where people get challenged is where it's appropriate, right? The idea
Right.
that if someone is in crisis, that's not the time to be being like wild salmon and
Right.
pesto.
Yeah.
If someone is depressed and overwhelmed, going through a big nutritional psych evaluation and lots of recommendations and a meal plan and recipes and cut a cupboard clean out.
No, no.
That's not
Right.
good clinical care. Saying, hey man, you don't have an appetite. That's really hard when you're so depressed. Can we think through some things that like might work?
Yeah.
That to me feels like great clinical care, right? Because then I'm addressing, okay, a symptom of this illness leads, whether it's anxiety or depression, leads to decreased appetite. If I tell my patients, hey, a great way to get a lot of calories in and a lot of nutrient density is a smoothie. You ever have smoothies? And they say, yeah, I love a smoothie. I haven't made one for a while. Oh, all of a sudden we've got
Yeah.
something that, we've got a little, I feel like I've got my fingers under the hood a little bit, right?
Yeah.
We've got making some little interventions. And do I think a smoothie in the morning is what like totally cures depression? No, but
No.
do I think
Right.
when patients don't have an appetite and you help them get in blueberries and kefir and some almonds and blend it all up, maybe a little mint and a little bit of almond or vanilla extract in there, right? And a
Yeah.
banana for sweetness. Okay, all of a sudden, it feels like I'm giving people a really concrete, empowering, delicious, piece of their treatment plan. So that's where I see it fitting in.
Yeah.
The other part is our meds cause a lot of changes in appetite, weight
Yes, they
gain.
do. Yep.
Right? So if you're going to put people on a set of meds in psychiatry, I think one of the parts that surprised me when I would get a little pushback is like, well, I just didn't understand it. It felt very, I was part of the generation of psychiatrists that we trained when Zyprexa came out.
Ah,
So
yes.
Zyprexa is that atypical antipsychotic
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is very effective in calming
Oh, yeah.
for
Yep.
psychosis, but also can cause tremendous weight gain to the tune of like 20 to 40 pounds for some patients. To the tune that sometimes you put patients on the medicine and like 4 or 5 days later you'd see them again because
Yeah.
maybe you'd been off and they noticeably gained weight.
Yeah.
And so practicing in that early paradigm, we were right away, you preemptively start talking about nutrition, weight control. I was helping run a day program, and we fed
Yep.
people lunch, and we noticed like a lot of hospital systems, you're like
Hmm.
saying healthy food out of one side of your mouth, and then you're feeding people garbage in the other side. I mean, that's hypocrisy. Like that's just not going
Yeah.
to work. So, but in terms of how it fits in, just to your question,
Hmm.
talking with patients about food is responsible medicine.
Yeah.
You don't have to have an advanced nutrition degree to understand the basics of a healthy diet. And
Right.
then I think it also, just like we talk about exercise and we want our patients to move their bodies for mental health, there's a way to eat that the data is increasingly showing us helps with mental health conditions.
Yeah. I think, when you're bringing up that aspect of just asking what the food life is like, I think that's so, so important. And it is that harkens back to that old school of, tell me about your day. Like
Mhm.
what is a day in your life like? And, kind of starting from that point of view, instead of just being like, well, here's my DSM checklist that I'm going to go through one by one to see if you hit these symptoms. And then I can say you have MDD and GAD and blah, 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 blah. What is your day like? What goes on? And then, yeah, it's so much of a richer history, so much of a richer view into the person's life, what they're going through and what they're experiencing, so that when we're formulating, our job is to just kind of formulate a treatment plan, right? We can say like, well, these things are things we want to emphasize, and these are things we want to kind of modify or make an intervention at, or pain points, whatever we want to say.
Yeah, and I think having a little bit of food around that, of just
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of that part of the treatment planning that's around
Hmm.
lifestyle, and isn't overwhelming, but
Yeah.
is encouraging. I even noticed that myself. I noticed, I don't know, a couple months ago, winter's coming. I'm feeling kind of going through a lot of transitions in my life. I'm sort
Yeah.
of late middle age, and so, and I just noticed, I wasn't taking care of my nutrition in the way that is true to my values
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons, right?
Yeah.
And so I just, steadily like noticed myself ordering more salads and fewer fries, picking more plants, cooking a little. I found myself just cooking more.
Yeah.
It was a very intentional choice that it was missing. has it won the war? No, no, but has it felt good in a lot of times? Yeah, it really has. And I think
Yeah.
also that aggregate, of making the right choice. I think in mental health, we learn quickly that it's not like you get that one interpretation and you feel better, or you
Yeah.
get that medicine and like, oh, the symptoms are gone, so it's all better.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about that consistency and commitment to it
Hmm.
that is what yields the results over time.
Yeah. With anything, right? Consistency is key for all of this. So
I think it's very hard with people for food, which is something that
yeah.
in some ways I'm grateful for our jobs because it's like, I don't know, at the time it's kind of it gives a lot of structure to when you can eat and what snacks you have. And my clinic here is loaded up with like dark chocolate covered nuts and
Not a bad thing.
seltzers. You know,
Yeah.
so anytime we want a snack, it's like, okay, you're snacking on something reasonably good for you.
We got some stuff. So good. You talked about, I mean, you brought up the buzzword that's out there. The big thing is the keto, right? A little self-disclosure-ish stuff. I did keto, I want to say for a few years.
That's so
Some,
cool. What
yeah,
happened?
I don't know. I think I was just reading enough stuff. I think it was during fellowship, and I was reading enough stuff, and a lot of things. Just I think that's like the first real big, huge keto explosion a few years ago came up. I must say like the mid 2010s or something like that. And I was like, let's try it out for a bit. And I did pretty okay with it. I mean, like just again personally, like I've always kind of like struggled in some way, shape, or form, like with my weight for a bit. I was like, during med school, I'd gotten up to like 300 pounds. Then like my turning point was always like, I always kind of tell the story of I was in surgery. I was a med student over the weekend in surgery rotation. And then I got called into a diabetic foot getting amputated. And I was like, oh my God, this is, I was like a 30 something year old guy. And I was like, oh, this is where it goes. And I was like, let me make a change in my life. So I did that. And it was around the time that I met my wife. My wife is like, 5'2" and 100 pounds. So it was a little bit of a different, we looked very different together. So I was like, let's make a change. And so I, dropped like 100 pounds over the course of a couple of years. And then kind of like, have kids and you get busy with residency, weight kind of comes back here and there. So I was like, let's try something. And so I was like, let's do some keto for a bit. And it was all right. I had noticed some benefits from it. I dropped some weight. I got into the like, working out was good. Energy was all right. It was all right. But then, it's hard, right? Because the world is not meant to be keto, right? So I like stopped it, but like I've maintained like the lower carb kind of diet for the most part, and it's been fine and okay. Um, but yeah, and there's so much just kind of like miracles associated with it. When people talk about keto, it's like keto is a thing that cures everything.
Like psychedelic medicine. It's like
Yeah, like
they
psychedelic
did not
medicine,
clear
right?
that.
Yeah. What's been your experiences with this, or what's the kind of the research and the data say? And yeah, I'm gonna jump into
Yeah,
there
so the keto diet, it's making the rounds now again. And
again.
the
Yeah.
keto diet has been popular. The first famous keto diet was called the Banting diet. And it
Okay.
was a British man who gave up beer and bread and lost all this weight. And he wrote
Yeah.
about the Banting diet, Mr. Banting.
Yeah.
And then there have been all kinds of derivations for weight loss. As you noted, when people, a ketogenic diet is when we're not eating very much carbohydrates, under usually 60 grams a day
Yeah.
or 40 grams, depending on who you're reading. And because of this,
20 people are like 20 grams. That's
20
like
grams.
the yeah, yeah.
So when this happens, your brain is very energetically intensive organ, right? It burns more fuel. Your neurons burn more gas than any other cell in your body. And so usually that's blood glucose. When you stop
Hmm.
eating blood sugar or sugar, so you're not eating carbohydrates, or your body has to fuel the brain and does this by breaking down fat products into what are called ketones, hence where a
Yeah.
ketogenic diet comes, a diet that makes ketones. So your liver is very good at this. So you don't have as much stored carbohydrate. The keto folks talk about this running on the big tank. You're not kind of going blood sugar meal to blood sugar meal, but you're using the month of fat that you have stored
Yeah.
and you're burning it. This becomes very exciting in the early 1900s, where it begins to be used for pediatric epilepsy. And so
Yep.
all of us in
Yep.
clinical practice know there's this kind of Actually, Oliver Sacks wrote about this really beautifully in his book Migraine, talked
Okay.
about this kind of convergence for some patients of affective symptoms like bipolar disorder, of migraines and other kind of almost, they talked about migralepsy,
Mm.
whereas this kind of triad of affective instability, migraines, and seizures, and kind of a variety of versions of that. And so the ketogenic diet for a patient like that is something to entertain. And
Yeah.
I think it's to note, and this doesn't get noted, most people with epilepsy who are kids don't get treated with a ketogenic diet. And part of that is it can be difficult to maintain, but part of it is maybe other treatments also do better.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with most mental illnesses. The majority of people aren't on a ketogenic diet, and they've been around. There's been literature about bipolar 2 disorder. There have been some case reports. To date, there have been no trials of a ketogenic diet in mental health.
Yeah.
Uh, there are 6 trials that have been funded by the Bazooki Foundation. They've really been very interested in this. Their son, Matt, is very open about his bipolar disorder and the use of a
Okay.
ketogenic diet to decrease the amount of medications that he's needed. And so their family, they have a family foundation. His father founded Roblox, the
Oh, wow.
video.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they've been really generous and very cool in terms of funding trials. To just simple questions. Should I talk to patients who have depression about a ketogenic diet? We don't know.
Yeah.
There's not any science.
Right.
In terms of what's underneath this is the idea that energetic functioning and mitochondrial functioning and challenges in that energetic functioning is at a root cause of mental illness. And there really isn't evidence, strong evidence for that currently. I think that's where people maybe are a little like confused sometimes about, I would say, like platform and
Hmm.
I think Chris is a clinician like me and
Yeah.
presents a few case reports in his book. But in terms of there being robust evidence in clinical trials, for the most part, there haven't been. And
Right.
and so what I try to approach clinically again is when people are interested in a ketogenic diet, to be encouraging of dietary changes. I also try really clear that we should focus on the data. I think the
Yeah.
concerning thing about a book like Brain Energy is it's not following the data because the data is right now really clear. There are 5 to 6 randomized trials showing that a Mediterranean style diet can put between 33 and 36% of patients with depression into full remission.
Yeah.
And so, that's very, in terms of nutritional psychiatry, where the
Right. Right.
data is. All that said, people with severe mental illness, they don't get included. What I love about Chris's book and Chris's message is who the hell else is talking about schizoaffective disorder and giving those patients tools? Who else is talking about severe mental illness, right? We talk a lot about affect disorders and anxiety and things that, people on Instagram resonate with.
Yeah.
But what I love about his book is that he's addressing a part of the population that often doesn't get these interventions, like
Right.
kind of talked about or promoted. And certainly for my patients with bipolar disorder, I have a patient right now with bipolar disorder, bipolar 2 disorder. It's like, she knows a ketogenic style diet works for her, right? And so when, she's in the midst of drinking way too much and eating lots of carbs, part of an appropriate treatment is saying, hey, man, you're describing, I don't say hey, man, but hey, you're describing some things you did that were really good for you,
Yeah.
that really helped stabilize you. And it sounds like it really worked. How can this treatment help you get back onto a more keto style lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I think about ketogenic. It's kind of one of the moves. I think, as you know, it can really be helpful for jumpstarting weight loss.
Hmm.
And then to try and not be fanatical about it. I think part of the challenge that we're seeing in the space is to make noise in any way or make an impact. You have to be so
Yeah.
extreme.
Yeah. And it's similar. I mean, I have a similar approach to it. Like I have patients will ask me about it and who will go on it. And I'm like, well, how's it going for you? And if it's doing something, if it's helpful, I'm not going to be like, well, no, there's no research, there's no evidence, so I suggest you not do it because there isn't evidence for it. I was like, no, you are the evidence yourself and in your own life. And even if there was evidence that's out there, we still say, well, this is this population, and we know that doesn't always work for everybody. And there's what's in the journals, and then there's real life, right?
Yeah. And then I think there's also just, the patient in front of you, where
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
think that one of the things that maybe you and I, share is an appreciation of clinical care And
Yeah.
kind of what makes it fun is it's like not always by the book,
Oh
like
yeah.
your job is to make a treatment and to
Yeah.
make a therapeutic alliance. And, so I'm really lucky being in the nutritional psychiatry space that people come to me with all kinds of fun and interesting questions about food. We also have an incredible member on our team, Emily Berner, who is a
Okay.
chef and a health coach. And we teach a free cooking class, mental fitness. I think it's the only nutritional psychiatry cooking class out there. It's free every quarter. We call it the Mental Fitness Kitchen. And so
Okay.
we've had usually we have like 50 to 100 people. We've had up to 1,000 people. I
Oh
think
wow.
once the New York Times picked us up once. It was amazing.
Nice.
It's like nutritional psychiatry happened. It's like we had all these folks who are just loving this content and interested in it. But it also felt really wonderful just to, I don't know, it felt really wonderful to be together and come together as a group. And one of the things that doesn't get emphasized about nutritional psychiatry enough, we talk so much about like the omega-3 fats and inflammation and the microbiome, but just, the way that food is good for our mental health because it brings
Yeah.
us together.
Oh
And
yeah.
so whether you're having a potluck or whether you're inviting friends over to grill or whether you're all going out for date night with some friends, I mean, those are the best conversations and the most wonderful meals. And like, is it better if you're eating wild salmon? Sure. But what's amazing for your mental health is that connectivity and socializing.
Yeah. No, I think kind of like what you're describing before with, when we work as a child psychiatrist and I asked like what's dinner like, again, that's exactly the kind of idea is that you want to kind of see what is it like? Is it everyone sitting in their own rooms doing their own thing, or are they sitting around the dinner table connecting? I know like when we had some work stuff and, we every Wednesday or every week we'd have like our team meeting and someone would have it be on breakfast duty. And one of the docs one day was like, I don't want to do the breakfast anymore. They were throwing a fit and we're like, I don't want to buy the breakfast. It's annoying for me to buy breakfast. I was like, well, we're destroying the whole kind of Trimid team by doing this. I was like, it's more than just like we sit around and we talk about the patients. We each take turns doing our part of like buying the bagels or the donuts or whatever it is. And it's like, it's a community. It's that part of it. Like we're supposed to model for our patients and we got to model it for ourselves too.
Hmm. No, I know that I really appreciate that I find I'm in a lot of mental health meetings where no one says, "Hey, everybody, let's just take a minute now,
Yeah.
take a breath, connect with each other." It's where I've been really lucky to have our team grow and have people like Amy Lane here
Hmm.
in Spruce, who is our spiritual director,
Nice.
who is an ex-Episcopalian priest who's gotten into the integration and psychedelic work and trauma
Yeah.
work. I'm so appreciative that we start our team meeting with some breaths and some prayer and some intention uh, and it's really grounding and helpful and I think helps us with the authenticity of what we're here for.
Yeah.
That if we can't do that ourselves, it's funny. We're going to host a workshop for healthcare provider burnout. We're right across the street from the hospital, and so
Oh,
our
nice.
Jeff Greenbaum who directs our psychedelic medicine. He's the ER director here. Incredible doc, really fun guy.
Yeah.
We got a protocol together. We got funding, right? So basically, if you wanted to treat your healthcare provider burnout pretty much for free with psychedelic medicine, you could do so here in Wyoming,
Nice.
right?
Nice. Okay.
We didn't have anybody sign up,
Oh, wow.
and a lot of people called. People were anxious. People were nervous. And then I had this moment, Salman, where I realized people hadn't signed up because we ourselves hadn't kind of organized enough to feel comfortable in the space journeying.
Hmm.
And so until we could kind of maybe do that, it wasn't maybe as not that it wasn't authentic, but it just kind of struck me, as you're saying, right? Building that intentional community. If you're going to ask patients to do it, you have to model it. And
Yeah. So it's good. What are your thoughts on? I know we're having another rise in that kind of like the medication is like the GLP-1 agonists and all those the Wegovys, the Ozempics,
yeah, yeah.
all those Mounjaros, all that stuff.
Uh-huh. I treat a population that
Yeah.
often tries stuff early.
Yeah.
And so for a couple of, maybe a little over a year, I've had a few patients who, whether it's for true medical need
Hmm.
or for what we're seeing that, I think concern a lot of people, but it's out there where people are using this more for aesthetic need. They've had a
Yeah.
hard time
Yeah.
losing 10 or 15 pounds. And so I think there's a big debate right now of, who should get this medicine, what's medically appropriate. Um, the part that's curious to me, the most curious part, is the way that it affects people's food, behavior and appetite,
Oh
and
yeah.
substance craving.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so I have a number of patients who've had severe alcohol use disorder who, on one of these medicines, just,
It disappears.
yeah,
Yeah.
it just kind of disappears. And so I think it's an interesting time that there's a lot of anti-psychiatry and anti-pharma movement, right?
Yeah.
I love the kind of hypocrisy of people. I remember about like a year and a half ago, there was like serotonin's not the basis of depression and all
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
And everybody's up in arms. I saw all these wellness influencers, we've told you, like, I've been saying this for years, blah, blah, blah. All the psychedelics work through the serotonin receptor. It's like, what
Yep.
what are these people talking about? So
What do you think What do you think LSD does? Yeah.
5-HT,
Yes.
2B and 2C receptors, like that's where it's all at.
Oh yeah.
Not that serotonin's everything, but I think it's a really interesting moment where there's such enthusiasm for the power of pharmacology,
Hmm.
whether it's Mounjaro or Wegovy, or whether it's MDMA or ketamine or
Yeah.
psilocybin. And at the same time, there's this like stigmatizing anti-stimulant, anti-psychiatry, anti-SSRI movement
Oh
that's
yeah.
also really feels like it has a lot of momentum. And I think it's so hard for both patients and practitioners these days. Something that should be reasonably straightforward. You seem like this medicine might help you. Let's try it. All right? If it doesn't work, we'll stop it. If it does work,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's gotten really complicated. It's like a branding issue almost now, whether you prescribe or not.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, we get into these debates all the time, and a lot of the Twitter where the world is, very loving and supportive, where people will have these kind of outlooks and again, yeah, make it their whole agenda. We run into psychiatrists who are very much like, I am a psychiatrist, but I've seen the light, and I will never prescribe these medications again, and I'm going to dissuade you from ever like looking at this stuff as yeah. But yeah, there's so many of those guys.
I knew
Yeah.
Kelly in New York, and I remember I was
Oh
sitting next to
yes.
her at a bar once,
Yeah.
and I'd just come from our sons getting vaccinated.
Yeah.
And I had and I'd come to this event, and I was standing next to her, and she proceeded to kind of talk about what an idiot people were. What she said, like, I'm never putting a simian monkey virus in my child. And I'm just sitting there feeling like, am I a chump? For like, I was like so kind of confused about uh, I think I'm confused often by the arrogance of influencers' stance, and it often
Hmm.
means to me that people don't see patients or they
Yeah.
see a cult of patients.
Hmm.
My patients really challenge me
Yeah.
and they push back, and I love that.
Yeah.
I think that, and it feels often that people confuse actual treatment, right, which is around confrontation, right, and clarification,
Hmm.
and empathy. I think sometimes people confuse that for like dogmatic messaging, right?
Hmm.
We're in treatment because like we all agree about the same values, right?
Yeah.
And that I just yeah, it's an exciting time because there's so much mental health information out there, but I think it's really confusing sometimes to know what side is up. What
Yeah. It is. It's complicated. So if you were to like, for people who are watching, listening, whatever they are doing, if there's like a take home message on like what are the best mental health stuff. I think you talked about it a little bit earlier, but like how do you build your nutritional psychiatry pyramid, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things. I think nutritional psychiatry for me is fitting into this overall concept of mental fitness. So, like our
Hmm.
latest e-course, Healing the Modern Brain, is a mental fitness e-course. It's trying to say like food is one of these pieces, but if you don't have any relationships, if you don't work on your self-awareness, if you don't have a set of movement or exercise that speaks to you and you engage in regularly,
Yeah.
now the food helps, great keeping in the food, but it's just one part. And
That's
and
one
so I
part. Yeah.
think for our pyramid, from food wise, I have this little rhyme: seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little dark chocolate, as a way of giving people what we call food categories. So to me, nutritional psychiatry works in food categories.
Yeah.
It's not that you should eat meat or not eat meat. It's that you should look at the category of meat and think about your values. You should think about what you're consuming. You should look at the low hanging fruit, i.e., all you do is eat bacon and ham. Easy move. I'm going to get you over to
Yeah.
hamburgers. Why?
Yeah.
Because you're going from processed meats to unprocessed meat, right? All you do is eat hamburgers. Okay, well, I'm going to start thinking about how do we diversify the proteins in your life, right? Is there some pork or chicken or fish? So there's a way that food category is something for each of us to kind of analyze and understand where we're looking to increase diversity. Leafy greens is a great one, right? It's not like all I
Yeah.
do is eat kale. I probably mostly eat basil is the most common green because I'm really after linalool in the basil, which is this very cool same molecule that's in lavender as in
Yeah.
basil.
Yeah.
They say it calms you down. It's maybe.
Who knows? A little bit.
So, but those seafood greens, nuts, and beans on a little dark chocolate being food categories, there are obviously a couple others that are super important. Rainbows. Look at your plate. You got 3 colors on there? If not, make it happen. Right? More
Yeah.
colors equal more phytonutrients. More phytonutrients, just kind of interesting in the sense that there's a very diverse set of molecules that have biological activity. And then fermented foods, this idea that we have a microbiome, all these bugs, these bacteria organisms mostly that live in our colon,
Yeah.
and the types of food you eat affect the types of bacteria there. The types of bacteria in your gut affect your health risk for things like depression. And
Hmm.
so it's really early science, but most of what seems to be suggested is eating more fermented foods leads to more diversity in your microbiome. More diversity
Yeah.
in your microbiome is a strong health signal. And so more plants and more fermented foods. Most people are kind of hearing the probiotic message and eating, pills. I
Yeah.
really recommend live fermented foods. These are kombucha, your kefirs, kimchi, miso, making your own sauerkraut, super fun thing to do with your kids, making your own kombucha, very
Yeah.
exciting. So these are, again, eating live bacteria. It's really interesting, Suleiman. The bacteria you eat, right, we're guzzling our lactobacillus and bifidobacter.
Yeah.
That's not the bugs that grow. And when you look at the diversity studies, right, you're drinking one bacteria, but the diversity happens
That thing
actually
is
with
in there.
different species probably that are already down there.
Yeah.
And so it's really an unraveling story or unwinding story that's very cool of, and again, like a new intervention, right? We're talking about like the keto diet, like, okay,
Yeah.
that's, not a lot of data, but some interest, a lot of, kind of narrative experience with that. But, same thing is like, what about like, for patients who are struggling with affective disorders or anxiety, what about fermented foods? Like
Hmm.
what does that do? How does that help? Does it help? So,
Yeah. No, yeah, I think it's really interesting to that, and I think we see that with our patients too, right? Is that um, I, the shift that occurs like in their diet, right, or in what they're eating as a whole. So, and then the activities that go along like with that. So when we do things like I'm going to start cooking my own foods,
mhm.
right? That is a massive shift, and part of my mind is like I'm looking at it as like, oh, we're being more active, we're engaging in more activity because cooking food and preparing your own dinners is an action versus just opening up an app and
Uh-huh.
ordering it and it just shows up on your doorstep. Like that's we would try to promote physical activity, and kind of like we said before, it's the best kind of exercise, the best physical activity is the one that you do
Mhm.
and that you continue to do. I had like even just a dad was asking me a bit earlier about like, oh, is my son playing basketball? Is that like an okay thing? I was like, does he enjoy basketball? Does he do it? Yeah, by all means, that's totally fine for him to keep playing basketball. Like, and please encourage him to keep playing basketball if he loves
Mhm.
it. It's like he doesn't need to like stop playing basketball to like pick up weights or to like start lifting all the time. Like whatever he does, like that's better than not doing anything. So yeah, like again, when we start making our own food, making our own dinners and lunches and whatever it is, like that shows activity. It just shows that momentum. There's an interest that's in that and a desire to kind of improve or get better in that aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the benefit. I've got a video up on YouTube, the
Hmm.
9 mechanisms of nutritional psychiatry.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we focus on the nutrients, like, yeah, sure, you're getting more magnesium, that helps some people.
Yeah.
Maybe you're eating more anti-inflammatory foods, or even better, you're eating fewer inflammatory foods, which is probably the effect for a lot of
Yeah.
people. But there's something about the engaging and caring for the self
Yeah.
that having a sense of organization, and I even say a sense of mastery,
Yeah.
that most of the food you're eating, like, I don't know, all the food I eat, I love eating. And I
Oh
feel
yeah.
like so privileged and blessed. Like I get to pick that I want to eat salmon. Like what? And I can make it at home how I want. It's like
Yeah.
amazing privilege. So I think that there is kind of asked in some ways like where to start. I think that everyone listening probably has an idea of what would be next on their agenda if they were going to
Hmm.
pick a small goal. Like for me, it would be, I don't know, I'm like eating a ton of ice cream to comfort myself. And
Yeah.
so, again, not that I need to just not eat ice cream, but like, could I swap that out like tonight? Like, could I have some granola with kefir on it and some blueberries? Or instead of having ice cream, could I just have a couple pieces of dark chocolate? Or a piece of fruit, right? And if so, like, do I feel like I'm not rewarding myself? Do I feel bored? Like, what? I mean, that's still a delicious sweet treat. Like, what's going
Sure.
on in my psychology a little bit? But everybody listening, Sulman, you too, you have a little
Yeah.
thing that maybe you want to work on. And that's where I encourage people to start. I usually think about, again, in food categories, like, I don't know, last night I made steak and potatoes and there was not another vegetable and I felt horribly ashamed. I told my daughter, open up the fridge, find a
Yeah.
vegetable, any vegetable. It's like, yeah, there's not much that looks good in here, bro. And I was like, okay, well, what does that mean to me? It means I just really need to double down on having more produce in the fridge. It means that next time I'm going to make sure and there's really a lot more plants. And also, I'm not going to be too harsh on myself. It was beef and potato. Those are two pretty healthy foods for growing
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And so, as a nice grass-fed steak and some yummy organic potatoes roasted in olive oil,
Yeah.
and the kids devoured it. And so, there is a way that thinking about those little things in your own life, think about maybe some of these food categories we've talked about that, you just haven't thought about fermented foods, or you just haven't really eaten any seafood for the last month. All
Yeah.
right, that gives you a
Start bringing
great
in.
little place to start.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's start wrapping up a little bit just because I have to see patients in 15 minutes. Oh my goodness. But your what is your self-care? I think you're talking about it a little bit with like cooking and etc. But your types of self-care.
Yeah, my self-care recently has really revolved around kind of family life, I would say,
Hmm.
of just some things I have really been like wanting to focus on, and even like metrics around that. For me, it's really important to eat dinner with my kids and my family almost every
Yeah.
night, and really, I don't know, about 6 months ago, I put breakfast on my schedule because I kept being in Wyoming. I have opportunity to see a lot of early morning patients on the East Coast. So
Yeah.
usually,
Yeah.
kind of 5:30 or 6, and it's easy to just work through breakfast. And so, self-care for me right now, having young kids, is really trying to prioritize that time with them, quality time with them, right? Where I'm like looking in
Yeah.
their eyes, I'm asking them about their math homework in detail, like I'm being a good dad. That's a little challenging for me. I get a little distracted with my patient care and the
Oh yeah.
neuroses of platform building and books and all that stuff. And so, for me, self-care has really been around uh, uh, that aspect. I think in terms of some of the basics, in terms of food, I'm at this point pretty simple dialed in eater. I
Yeah.
start mornings with coffee and half and half. I don't eat a lot of food probably until later in the day. I'll have some nuts. I'll have a little dark chocolate and some cashews.
Yeah.
Uh, if I do have some breakfast, it's going to be, ideally a little bit of yogurt or some kefir. But, I'm also, as I post online, prone to toast and don't mind that. Um, I try to, get a big plant-based meal in once a day if possible, whether it's a big salad. I'm right across the street from the St. John's Hospital here
Oh
in
nice. Yeah.
Jackson. They have like the most freaking amazing, like literally, they've got like rare ahi tuna over like
Oh wow.
organic greens for like $6. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so I go over there and try and get a salad, and then I'm big into soups. And
Okay.
like so it's lentil soup season, and so my wife will cook up a giant batch of lentils and onions, and I'll kind of eat on that for lunch
Yeah.
with maybe a scoop of yogurt, and then a lot of microgreens thrown on. Whether
Nice.
it's
Okay.
arugula, I just find that to be a good something about it. Just like I don't know, I use those a little bit more, and I think there's a little more concentration. Um, I think in terms of other self care stuff, I'm out here in the mountains, and so probably something I'm struggling with, to be honest, right now is just to be really active. My mood tends to dip a little bit in the summer, oddly, and so
Hmm.
we're just headed into mountain season here, where I find myself outdoors on the weekends, out in the mountains, out by myself. I just picked up split boarding, so
Okay.
that's where you go up the mountain, which we say earn your turns,
Yes.
and that's something really spiritual for me, Salman, about
Yeah.
being up on the mountain going up. I don't know what it is. It's like I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't feel it feels like it doesn't feel like it takes energy. It literally feels like one of those perpetual motion machines, like as I'm going up the mountain. So that's been a big part. And then what else is in my? I've been thinking a lot about in terms of self care. I'm working on a new book called Healing the Modern Brain, based on an e-course. And so
Mm.
as I've been going through each chapter, thinking about the tenets of mental fitness, I've really been trying to kind of do an inventory of my own life, like I was journaling the other day about like my neurotic angst and pain and whatever. And my wife's turning 50, and I just had this real shift of like I need to dedicate a couple pages to my wife and what's going on in terms of her turning 50, what's going on in terms of our life together, what I need to be kind of maybe alerting myself to and thinking about
Yeah.
that I want to do better in the relationship. So I think self care for me is a lot of like relationship management and noting, just probably I'm about 10 years older than you, but just,
Yeah.
the 50s are like a stage of life where you're starting to lose a lot of people who really matter.
Yeah.
Uh, you're, seeing your kids kind of grow into these amazing individuals, but also sensing separation, and that being, I think, especially for those of us who get really grounded in parenting, all of
Yeah.
the kind of focus and attention and service is really, for a lot of people, very fulfilling and structuring. It's like a long. I told you I was looking forward to a session with you, so now you finally gave me a moment to like tell you about my self care. My biggest part of my self care, someone is I got to be careful not to cry here. Is I've lost, and so actually
Mm.
it's a timely question. I the most powerful part of my mental health has been my wife bought me a horse a couple years ago as I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
having a really hard time with a depressive episode, and I've ridden my whole life, but I'd never ridden. I grew up kind of rural Indiana, kind of poor. Like if you had a
Yeah.
horse, you had like a trainer, and so I'd never been in the ring with somebody trying to work with me. And so over maybe the last 2 or 3 years, have been jumping horses, and then just about a week ago, I had to put down my horse. He had a spinal
Yeah.
cord compression, and so in some ways, I'm a little lost. I've never actually found something athletically that was so easy and compelling for me. And then also, there's something about grooming the horses, which is like there's actually a study out of Columbia. They had veterans do a horse grooming like
Yeah. Yeah.
protocol.
Yep.
Come on, let them ride the horses. Like they didn't even ride. And they
No.
showed an increase in, along with treating the PTSD pretty effectively, they showed an increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Oh yeah.
So, but anyway, in terms of, I'm kind of reeling a little bit. 3 weeks ago, I would have told you about these, like, this giant bubba of mine and
Yeah.
our connection and how it was like physically, spiritually, and psychologically healing for me. So I would say my self-care plan right now is trying to be really mindful of the need for recovery
Yeah.
from that kind of loss and not trying to have the grace that I don't have a full answer to that yet.
That is, I think that's totally right. And our everybody's condolences. I know, like I was like, my cousin lost her horse recently, and it was like a big, big loss. Unfortunately, she had lost her husband a few years before then, and then the horse loss. I was just like, we all kind of knew. We're like, oh, this is going to be a big loss. This is a huge
There
loss, and yeah,
are those of us who are horse people where like we kind of get along with the horses in a way that's I don't know
yeah,
probably weird just people outside of it, but there's just something very soothing and calming
yeah.
for me. And but yeah, I think it also feels a little silly sometimes, or not silly, but like a
No,
little. I've
no,
had a hard time with it. Like I haven't really been able to post about it. It's felt very
yeah,
an era where people are losing families and we're at
sure, yeah,
war and people are over. It's all this. It's a little hard to understand the intensity. It's where I always feel when patients come in and they're like, I know this sounds silly, but my dog died and I'm like suicidally
oh,
depressed. It's like, no,
yeah, no, we understand,
I'm an
yeah,
animal person. Like I get that.
yeah, yeah.
But anyway, that's a long answer to my
No, no,
my
no,
self-care. I'm trying to eat better. I'm trying to love deeper
yeah,
and enhance the relationships in my life that matter. And I think I'm trying to be less distracted by what I call desiccated relationships.
hmm.
Things that I may be attached to but aren't really serving me as much, or
Yeah,
that have their time has come and gone.
yep,
And that's I think where my kind of mental health game is right now.
yeah. No, I know we were talking about like the horse therapy and stuff as well. Like we're in Northern Virginia. We're right in horse country over here, and there's so much of like horse therapy. I think one day we had the opportunity to kind of do exactly what you're saying was like the grooming, and I was like, oh my God, I get it.
Think
I was
also
like,
as a man, right?
yeah,
There's not, it's not like I go like, hey baby, like, can I brush your hair for 10 minutes
yeah,
and exfoliate your back?
yeah,
Right. Like, I've never done that with my wife, right? Maybe a little
all right.
hairbrush. But,
But like, yeah,
and so I find it really interesting as a man to be in service of
hmm,
this giant, majestic creature that
oh
also
yeah,
wasn't like it activates all those things for men about and women, but about control and
yeah,
also physical control. To be around something that, like, when I hug him, it's like he's bigger than I am, right?
yeah,
When he goes to push my body, he pushes me right out of the way. There's like I can't overpower him with my strength, and
no,
so
right,
there's something about for me about the examination and kind of exposure of masculinity
hmm,
and being in service of this creature and this reminded me almost like how bath time with the kids as a guy is a little surprising because it's like so silly and fun and kind of you're caring for someone in a very
yeah,
like beautiful way. So yeah, you get to bathe the horses. That's sort of the most. I mean, it's like this ridiculous thing. It's like this giant doll. You dress up.
yeah,
I had a raincoat. I had a warm coat. I had like this sort of show up at it. So, but anyway, in terms of that yeah, I really found it this like psycho spiritual physical challenge
oh
that
yeah,
like is like not it's not really like other treatments that I'd ever been in.
yeah. No, it is something that's there, and I think people who kind of mock it from the outside, they need to kind of experience it and see like what, just like anything, right? Like what these things actually are, these treatments that work in a way. So
Yeah, it's they're I think about the horses as mirrors and as
yeah,
antennas,
yeah,
and the antenna for like the big energy, the big grand unconscious of how it pulls you into something kind of ancient and human, and then
yeah,
the mirror of it just exposes so much for us about ourselves and
oh
how
yeah,
we function, how we try to try and control things, how we deal with frustration, how we deal with tenderness and sensitivity and
yeah.
disappointment. It's just so fascinating. You go out to get your horse and he doesn't come to you, and you're like, oh, like
What's
really?
yeah,
But yeah, Sulman, thanks for
no,
helping me process a little bit.
of
It's
course,
not been a very I've not ever had to do that before. It's not been good. So
yeah. No, it is a hard time for sure. But thank you for sharing that with me and with everyone else. Who else? And thank you for your time in general. Any plugs? Any last minute plugs? I know we're pivot on that end.
Oh man, I just want to plug you, everybody. I mean, first of all, if you're
Ah,
still with us, thanks for listening. But I really thank you for following Sulman. I think that he is one of the really new, fresh voices in mental health and media. And I thought that before he invited me to be on his podcast. I really love your content, man. And I am really hoping to get to know you and become friends with you over time. And I really
yeah,
appreciate your gentle voice and your curiosity. But I think the thing that I really love about you is your confidence. There's something about like for Med Mondays where there's a confidence you have about medications, or when you get into controversial subjects and you educate us with, those like slide carousels. Yeah. So mostly I would want to plug you. Anybody who's, interested, I think you've heard the best. You've heard about my horse pain, which is all I talk about these days. But, you've heard a little bit about my encouragement that you look at food and mental health. I love it if you check out my books. Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety is the most recent one. I'm really easy to find. I'm drewramseymd.com is my website. Drew Ramsey MD is who I am on Instagram. And then my new podcast will be dropping here in a few months, the Drew Ramsey podcast. So I shouldn't be hard to find. We've got a great clinical team. We've got some great e-courses. We have a nutritional psychiatry training e-course for clinicians, as well as our Healing the Modern Brain e-course. And we've got a bunch of cool free downloads on our website for anybody who wants to
awesome.
get into this stuff.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely link everything up. So, Dr. Ramsey, of course, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, look forward to having you, returning this favor, have you on my podcast as we get up and running and polished. And
Yeah,
everybody, thanks so much for your time and your attention. And, my only request is take some tidbit, whether we said anchovies or lentils or pesto and it stuck with you, or you said yuck, or you said I'm going to try that, but please take something from this conversation and use it to feed your mental health somehow. However that manifests for you, that's really my hope for this conversation, that you take something from it and it
Yeah.
helps you with your mental health. So thanks so much, Salman. I can't wait to hanging out with you down the road. And what are we're gonna meet APA in May, you think? You're gonna be
I'll
up there?
I'll be actually I'm presenting over there. We're talking about like why your psychiatrist should be on TikTok and stuff. So
I'm
we've
gonna
got a
have
couple
to
of
come and
people.
cheer for you. I can't wait to
Yeah.
see you. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah, it'll be my first meeting, so excited. So yeah.
I started going when I was about your age, actually, not to sound
Yeah.
ageist, but I remember kind of, and it was really powerful for me, Salman,
Yeah.
because I'd gone initially, and then I hadn't gone for a number of years, and I went, and I was just blown away with the diversity of our field. I
Yeah.
was blown away with like the intellect. I just like, I don't know, there's something that was so like powerful for me about getting back into the American Psychiatric Association annual meeting,
Yeah.
and just yeah, it's like a personal reflection and I guess almost like I guess a feeling of pride. I had this
Yeah.
real feeling of pride of like, man, I'm part of this group of professionals that cares about mental health, that's leading in mental health. We're all over the world. We care about the same stuff. We speak the same language. So I can't wait to see you in New York, man. We'll
Same.
have to plan some stuff and I can't wait to
No,
see your
no.
presentation.
Yeah, so it should be fun. So no, I'm very excited. It should be a good time.